What up, YouTube? Welcome back to the garage. I am Doc's Motorcycle Service. Rawr, 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 rawr. So, over my shoulder here you can see, just released the first video for the wiring harness. Today is Saturday, June 27th, if you're keeping up. We've experienced some delays in getting some work back. We've had some parts come in. Remember where I talked about planning for Project A and Project B and Project C and getting the parts ordered for all of them, so if something comes in and it's not right, you've got time to figure that out and then send it back and get the correct part before you actually get to that part of the project. Well, we've got parts that have come in and we've got parts that have not come in, and because of that we've made another executive decision that I'll get to here in just a moment. Before I get too far along, I want to talk to you real quick about the Facebook page. Again, go check it out. You've heard me talk about it enough. Go for a visit, post a question, keep up with what's going on. There's some little snippets of information that I release there that I'm not releasing here. So check it out. So, because we were not able to get the parts back in for the swing arm and the rear caliper mounting bracket that we sent off to the chromer, the COVID-19 thing has shut down some businesses. It has caused some businesses to lose some employees because of potential infection, what have you. I ain't going to get into that, but things are creeping along. I'm thinking that the chromer has had my parts for almost 2 months now, and I'm hoping to get some of those back very soon. I did visit with him a couple weeks ago, asked him to expedite the swing arm and the caliper mounting bracket so we can get the rear wheel on the bike. That's kind of important for what we're getting into now. As I mentioned before, we're going to try a little something different. We're going to move in a different direction. Overall, the owner wanted to go ahead and lower the profile of this bike, and he's picked up a lowering kit that we're going to talk about today. And we're going to install that lowering kit in the front of Donna, and we'll go over that. I've got some concerns about it, simply because I'd really like to have the rear wheel on for this project, but right now we got nothing going on. The wiring harness video is now up. That's going to be a little long, but go ahead and check that video out. Well, you've probably already checked it out, but there's going to be parts of it. That series of this is not done yet. So while we're waiting for other stuff to come in, we've decided to go ahead and put this front lowering kit in Donna. And this is going to be a good video for you to look at if you're considering lowering the motorcycle. So let's go ahead and take a look at the front forks and what we're going to do today. So basically what you have on the front end of your bike is you have your fork tubes up here and your sliders down here. Don't worry about the soup cans. The soup cans come up and mount up here at the top, and they're just there as a decorative item to cover up the transition of the tubes going into the sliders. Basically inside this, the forks here, you have a smaller spring down here at the bottom, the dampening spring. Then you have a dampening rod, and then you have a really long spring in the top half of this that's under pressure. So tech tip, safety tip. When you're taking this apart, realize that this larger spring is under pressure. So when you go to take out the cap here, the tube cap bolt in here, you're going to have to be real careful with that, because it is under some pressure and it'll fly off there if you're not careful. Because Donna's a 1986, again, she has a two-piece spring system in here, and what we're going to have to do is remove these caps from both sides. They're decorative, there's a inset here, screw on the bottom, hex head, that presses against the axle and the axle nut. We're going to take these off. Once we do that, we'll be able to remove these two nuts and this cap off the bottom, which is going to release pressure on the axle. We'll remove the axle out. Then basically these sliders are going to want to drop down past the wheel, and we're going to feel our way through that. As I mentioned before, the COVID thing has sort of got Linda's mom discombobulated right now, and she's having to spend a lot of time with her. She's not here at the moment, but when she gets back, we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll put some blocks under the back of the frame here, which you can probably already see, so that the frame can lower down here, and then we'll pull the wheel out. Or we may end up jacking it up a little bit to take the wheel out and then lowering the frame down onto this. We made the executive decision to go ahead and do this now while the handlebars are off the bike. You, in your situation, if your bike is up and running and has everything on it, you're going to have to look at what you're going to have to do to make this happen. I'm going to put a reference up here, a little tag, to another video that I did where we rebuilt these forks last year. So if your bike is in a situation where it's completely together, it's not in this state, then you may want to go back and take a look at that video to get the hints on how to take your handlebars off, your headlights, your turn signals, and all that. But basically what we're going to try to do is get inside these tubes, take care of this kit without having to remove anything else. I got a theory on how that's going to happen. We're going to make that work, or at least try. Another area of concern that's always gotten me about some of these older bikes is your drain plug here. Donna has always had a leak here, and I hate leaks. From the factory, you have these screws with a copper clench or crush washer on them. The idea behind the crush washer is it's made out of copper, and copper is one of the softest metals out there. The theory is that you'll take this copper washer, put it against the slider, and then put this slotted head screw in there. The problem with that is, it's simple. It's a slotted screw. They're hell to get torqued down to the right specification. Your copper washer goes back here, and as you tighten this down, the copper washer should crush. In other words, both sides should meet metal and then squeeze in to fill in any imperfections in the metal, thus preventing a leak. The problem with that, as I said, is you can't get the torque on this Phillips head or this slotted head screw to make that happen. So the fix for that was really simple. Find a more sturdy bolt, something that you can actually get some torque on and tighten down so that the copper washer, the crush washer, will do its job. What I found was this kit. This kit is made by Gardner Westcott Company, and it's a bolt, fork, drain, Allen screw. Basically, it comes with 2 copper washers, 2 new stainless steel chrome bolts, but more importantly, it has a hex head on it. And with that, you're going to be able to really cinch this thing down and get it where you need it to be at. So, also, I'm not going to go off camera to do this, but we ordered a stainless steel braid, well, not stainless steel, but a steel braided speedometer cable that's going to have to go on Donna, and we're going to have to take the wheel off anyway to make that happen. So that's it. That's what we're going to do today, and it's almost perfect that all these things came together, that we're going to be able to make it all happen today and take care of all this at one time, and then getting it buttoned back up. So come along. So we started off by removing the drain plugs and allowing the fork oil to drain over a series of a couple of days. We've got that drained. Now we're going to move those out of the way. We're going to remove the chrome decorative caps from both sides, and we're going to go ahead and get the cap removed on the bottom, and then we'll be ready for Linda to show up here and we'll get the front end tore apart. We got our chrome covers off, we got our caps out, we got the cap and the axle nut removed from the other side. So what we're going to do now, and again this is kind of precarious, we've elected to use the John jack in the background there to help lift the front of the frame while we have the back of the frame with a ratchet strap. So my theory here is the ratchet strap will hold it in the back, the John jack will raise up the front. That will lessen the tension of the sliders on the axle, and we'll be able to manipulate that. Oh, can you hold down right there?
Yep.
Got it?
Mm-hmm.
Lift up a little bit more.
Slide it off.
All right, hold on. All right, ease it back down. Ease it back down. Ease it back down. So we got the forks out now, or we got the tire off now. Now we're going to add a couple more ratchet straps to this thing, because although the pinch points are not in the bottom of the stem assembly, it's still going to be tight wiggling this thing down. Tech tip: depending on your project, before you take these all the way out, put your pinch bolts back in and loosen this tube cap bolt. If you don't, once you get this out without putting this in a vise and screwing it up, you're not going to be able to break these loose. In our situation, we had to put them back in because they'd been taken out when this piece was powder coated. So we're going to tighten these back down and snug them up to hold this. Then we'll break these loose, but we're not going to take them all the way out because remember, they're under tension. So we're going to get them loose over here and then move it out of here and start working on it. So wanted to point out something to you here that we noticed when we got the two pans in the light. Can you see that area right there? Watch it when I move the pan. I had a suspicion that this might be water in the fork oil. So what I did is I ran a little experiment. Here I've got water. I've done it over here in this one. But watch what happens when I let a little bit of water into the fork oil. Look at that. It's almost just the same, and it acts the same as that right there. So when you drain your fork oil, check it. Anytime you drain any oil, you should check it and look for anything in it that should not be there. So this tells us there was water in the fork. So now I'm going to play with trying to figure out how that got in there. So we got the fender off, we got the soup cans removed, they just slide off the top. Consulting our service manual, I saw a tip in there that said that you should remove these dampening rod bolts prior to taking the main springs out of the fork. I don't know why, but maybe the tension on the springs down here is what will allow you to break this nut loose up here. It said if you take those springs out before loosening this nut, the dampening rod may spin with the nut. So that's what we're going to do now. Also, bear in mind, sorry, I had to laugh. I think a bumblebee bumped into Linda's elbow and she looked like she's about to have a come apart behind the camera. It's important to have the right tool. Over here, because of the cap, we're able to get in here with a shallow 6mm Allen. Over here, it won't fit, so we're having to use our extended. So make sure that you got your tools. There's nothing wrong, I've said this before, there's nothing wrong with looking at a project and making sure that you have the right tools before you get it started. So we're going to loosen these. We're going to set this back up. So we've started loosening these things. Now, yours may be different, but my cap is about this long, I think. Again, we've talked about turning wrenches. You're going to feel a little resistance in here, and you're going to hear this thing turning, but you're going to want to have a hand on it when it comes loose. If not, it's going to come out of your hand. Tech tip, put a towel over your painted surfaces. And know that when this thing comes out, even though we've drained the majority of the fluid, there's still probably going to be some on this. So when you go to pull your spring out, don't let it drip on your paint. Oh! Girly scream! So there you go. Can they see that? So you can see how deep that thing is in there. And it has an O-ring and then your threads. So I know you probably can't see this very well. Here is your main spring in the fork. So by contrast, here's the other one. So we're going to make up the difference with these up here, but we're still going to have to press them back in. So all smells good. We're going to lay this over to the side. We're going to take this one out. Then we're going to go to somewhere and get some lunch. Come back, finish the rest of it up. We got our bolt out, we got the dampening rod out, and you'll notice that we still have the fork tubes in. All we had to do was loosen the bolt in the bottom, turn it upside down, and shake it out. Now, just for comparison, this is the spring that came off, and this is the spring that we're replacing. So I'm not trying to understand the mechanics of how this works, and it doesn't work, but we're taking out a short spring and we're putting in a longer spring. And I think the reason we're doing that is this longer spring is going to help with the ride as opposed to the long spring that came out and the short spring that's going in. So now what we're going to end up doing is getting this plunger put back in the tube, held in place while we get this started. It's not going to be an easy thing to do, but we're going to make it happen, and we'll be right back. Okay, it's the next day. We had some terrible storms blow in the afternoon, and I don't know how you feel about it, but I've been outside most of my life. I hate to be in a cramped up room, so we just set everything aside and called BS on it, and here we are the next day. So we've got the springs in, and now we're going to get critical about some stuff. I'm going to urge you always read your instructions on any part that you put in. Read them 3, 4, 5, 6 times. I guess this would be a little tech tip. Read them until you understand them and then read them again. Alright? Because you can, based on your level of mechanical intelligence, your ability to understand and retain information, and also based on your level of tiredness, you can read something 3 different times and get 3 different meanings out of it. I know some of you sitting out there shaking your head. Some of you won't admit it, but it's true. Read it, and then read it again. Do not be afraid to call tech support over something. That's what they're there for. You know, think about this. This is the front end of your motorcycle. This is important. Okay? Y'all remember that video previously where I said the importance is on you? Even though you take it to a mechanic and the mechanic says that it's fixed, it's on you to make sure that it's fixed right. Alright? This is on you. So, make sure that you're doing it the right way. Which is going to take us into a couple of different steps here. Is the instructions that came with this kit. They're very vague. Very vague. They're meant to be that way. I think all manufacturers do it that way. That way, if something screws up, you can't come back on them and go, "Hey, you messed this up." And they go, "No, you didn't read the instructions." And they go, "Yeah, I did. They didn't make sense." Then they can come back and say, "Well, you should have found someone who could make them make sense to you." Which is another point. Once you think that you've got it figured out, call somebody, call tech support. Hop in a Facebook page and talk to somebody about it. Now that we have the springs in and following along with the instructions say, with the forks fully extended, cut the spacer. You have 2 of them. Notice it said cut. That's because it doesn't know. Because this kit is designed for several different applications. Keep that in mind. That's why your instructions are a little vague. That's why you got to read them good. That's why you got to ask questions. What was the old saying? Measure twice, cut once, file to fit. All right. So you got this. You got your spring in here. The instructions say with the fork tubes completely extended. Well, it's sitting on the table, so I have to pull up on it. It says cut the spacer so that the spring compresses 1.5 inches under the tube cap. Okay, let's say that again. Matter of fact, I'll read it to you. At this time, it is necessary to check fork spring preload with a fully extended fork. With the PVC material supplied in the kit, cut the spacer to a length that will allow the fork cap to compress the spring 1.5 inches. With the fork cap fully tightened. So, this is your fork tube cap. This is serious. I know some of y'all think I play around sometimes, but this is serious. Math is serious. This is the front end of your motorcycle, okay? You want to make sure that you do this right. And here's a little tech tip that we're going to talk about real quick. This is PVC. When we go to trim this or cut it to the length that will cause the spring to set 1.5 inches, compress 1.5 inches with the fork tube fully extended and the tube cap installed. There's a little hint right there. Did you see that? Look at this tube cap. Look how far that tube cap's going to go down in there. So we're going to have to do some math. But this is PVC. When you cut this thing, you want to make sure that it's cut straight. All right? Because here's the deal. You're going to have a washer on this end and a washer on this end. One washer is going to sit flat on the spring. Then you're going to have your spacer, and then up here you're going to have your other washer. And on top of that washer is going to be your fork tube cap bolt. And with some of this gone, this is going to be what's right in here. This is plastic being touched by steel on both sides with an aluminum washer in it. So you can imagine how the energy is going to pass in here. Well, imagine if you cut this crooked down here, and all of a sudden, instead of having a good level fit, it's kind of angled a little bit. Well, there's a gap on one side because you cut it crooked. It's touching on this side, but there's a gap over here. Now that normal energy that would be passed through here equally onto this plastic is now entering the plastic at one point. Now what happens if you cut it crooked up here? Now the energy is passing through here at another point. Now I'm not I started to say I'm not a physician, but I'm not a physicist. But I can tell you that if energy is passing into this plastic on this side and passing out of it on that side, it's going to work its way around there, and eventually this is going to crack and break. So safety tip, tech tip, when you go to cut this thing, cut it straight. With that said, this spring has to compress 1.5 inches with this with the fork tube fully extended. How you going to do that? Very simple. Get you a pad and a piece of paper and write some stuff down. I'm not going to take into account for the washers. I guess I could, but the washers are only Maybe. Okay, so they're a 1/16 of an inch thick. I personally don't think that's going to make that much of a difference. I think the important part here is to cut this straight. So, with the fork tubes fully extended, get your tape measure. Stick the tape measure down inside, on the inside of the tube, till it comes in contact with the spring. Alright, so that looks like that's going in about 2.5 inches. Alright, write that down. I'll see if I I'll see if I can put 2.5 up here somewhere. 2.5 inches, alright? Your fork tube cap nut. It bottoms out right there. So, once it goes into the tube, it's going to travel down 1 1/8 inches. Write that down. We'll put that, we might put that up here too somewhere. 2.5 space, 1 1/8 inches on this. It needs to go down 1.5 inches. So what is that? 2.5 plus 1.5 inches. Yes, 2.5 here. Needs to go down another 1.5 inches. You still with me? It's 2.5 now. It needs to go down an additional 1.5 inches. So 2.5 plus 1.5 inches is what? 4? Is that right? Alright. Yeah, 4. So we need to get the spring down here 4 inches from the top. So, and I'm not going to be able to do this very well by myself, but if you take this and know that this is going to compress it 1 1/8 inches, 1 1/8 inches from 4 inches is what? 2 7/8? Okay, so this spacer needs to be 2 7/8 of an inch long. Alright? If it doesn't make sense, if the math doesn't make sense, pause, rewind, well not rewind, telling on the age there, go back and watch the math again. You want it one more time real quick? Okay. This spring is now sitting down here 2.5 inches. It needs to go down 1.5 inches more. Alright. This plug cap is 1 1/8 of an inch. So if you put it right here, the spacer is going to be pushed down to right here. If we go down 4 inches and mark this, this is now going to be 2 7/8. This is 1 1/8. 2 7/8 plus 1/8 is 3, plus the other inch is 1. Alright, so now we're going to go cut this and then we'll come right back. So we got our 2 pieces cut and we used a vise to hold them. And I also used a square to check the cut once I was done to make sure that it was, make sure I cut it straight. So you can set it in a square and turn it, look out toward light, do a quarter turn, do a quarter turn, do a quarter turn, make sure it is where it is. Also used a small file just to clean up the inside edges. I know when people weld they call it slag, the leftover stuff, but just sort of took the file just like we did on the in the previous video when we cleaned up the spacers for the speedometer to get the little extra stuff off. So with that said, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead, get the spacers in, we're going to put the washer in, get the spacer in, do a test fit with the other washer and see if there's enough room in here to go ahead and put the fluid. Remember, consult your service manual about your fluid. Noting the quick reference guide, you'll go down to recommended lubricants and fluids. You'll notice that the fork oil recommends an HD Harley-Davidson Type E or equivalent. I decided to go with a heavier lubricant, the Screaming Eagle Performance Fork Oil Heavy, only because the guy at the counter recommended to me that since I'm a bigger, or since the guy who's riding this bike is going to be a bigger guy, the heavier, thicker fluid would probably do better and give a better ride. If we continue and look at the next page under front fork oil capacity, you'll notice that it says wet or dry. Under wet, it says FLST toward the bottom, 11.5 ounces. Dry, slightly to the right, 12.5 ounces. Well, let me explain that to you. Wet and dry. The forks either have no fluid in them or they have some fluid in them. Last year when we rebuilt the front fork seals on Donna and we took the lower sliders to a chromer to have them cleaned, they came back completely dry. This upper tube still had a little bit in it, so it could modestly be considered wet, but together they were wet and dry. So the book says 11.5 wet, 12.5 dry. This thing's been draining for about a week now, so I'm going to split the difference and go about 12. If I can get 12.5 in it, I'll try, but I do have a concern. The way we have Donna off the fender here, I'm having to hold this up. That's more capacity for the fork oil. If I let it down, that's less capacity for the fork oil. So I'm going to have to play it by ear. I may in fact take this and put it back into the bike so the front stem assembly can hold it up, and I'm not going to have to manipulate two things. Because if I get 12 ounces in this and slip and let go of it and it overflows over everything, I'm going to be highly agitated. So without the assistance of Linda being here today, I made the executive decision to go ahead, put the pinch bolts into the stem assembly and go ahead and put this thing in here and get it tightened up so the fender will hold it down and keep these in place. I can tell from previous experience in the size of the spacers, once I get the tubes into the pinch bolts right here, I'm going to have enough room to slide my spacer and stuff in there and get it where it needs to be. Plus, having the tubes back in the lower stem assembly is going to give me something to hold these tubes while I tighten down the tube cap bolts. So, if you're working on a style like this and you have your pinch bolts in and ready, have your ratchet and your socket ready to go, so when you get one side in, you can go ahead and tighten that down. This is going to be fun. Maybe not. Alright, so there should be enough downward pressure on this to hold it where I need it to be at, so I can tighten these up, but I'm still going to keep a hand on one of them. And again, you don't have to kill this right here. You just want it snug to where it'll hold that, and then you can come over and get your other side. Don't worry about these two being extremely level at this point. They can be off just a little bit while you're doing what you're doing. So now we're going to put the washer on top of the spring. Make sure that it lays flat and it doesn't go in there cockeyed. Lower it down with your finger, come out, put your spacer in, and let's see how this works. I'll do it on this side here so you can see a little better. This is also a good time, if you've not replaced them recently, to go ahead and check the O-rings around your tube cap bolts, because these really are the only thing that keeps the fluid from coming back up this way and escaping out of the tube. Well, you might think, well, how does fluid escape up? Well, remember, this whole system is working up and down up here, and when it's compressed, there's a lot of pressure on it. So we got our spring, we got our washer. We'll stick our little finger on it, slide it down, inspect it to make sure it's down in there nice and flat. So since Linda's not here, I'm going to use one of her glass measuring cups. And we said we were going to go at 12 ounces. So we're going to make sure that we have ounces marked on this thing. Going to go ahead and get the fluid in this. Again, just take your spacer back out. dribble it in. Make sure you got a towel around to keep control of it. If it gets messy, we're going to take care of that. Just pour it in, get it started, watch it, see where it comes up to. Try to get as much in there as you can. Alright, I don't see any, so I'm going to go back and get the other 4 ounces. Now again, keep in mind how far this has to go down. It has to go down into the tube down here. So you don't want to fill it up to the lip with this fluid. Pour it in. Keep it watching. Alright. Here we go. Again, have a wrench that fits the tube cap bolt. We're good. O-ring is good. It's only been in there less than a year. We got our spacer and our washer. We're going to put our spacer in. We're going to put our washer on. And then what we're going to try to do here is manipulate this thing by pressing down on it and getting it started, which is going to be a tough job, I'm not going to lie. Okay, so you can see that I had to put a glove on, and the key here is just to press it in and turn it, and eventually it's going to come out, but you're going to feel it want to start. At that point, set it back just a little bit, get a good hand hold on it, push it down and turn it, and you can feel those threads start. Once the threads started, I had my wrench ready, and I just came in between my hands and tightened it down. Well, not tighten it down, just went ahead and put it in. So I don't want any stress on these threads, so I'm just going to go ahead and snug this down for now. And as a precaution, because the top of this is open, I suppose you could have put all this in and then put the fluid in through the top of the cap, the tube cap bolt. But you're not going to be able to see how much is in there then. And if it overflows up here, it's going to make a mess. So I'm just going to put this in temporarily, because that'll become obvious why I'm doing that at a later point in the video, because this will not slide through there. I'm just going to put this in here to keep moisture and contaminants out of the oil. Alright, so that one's in. Now we'll do the other one. Okay, so there you go. Now obviously we're not going to be able to tell any difference in the ride height of Donna until we get the wheel back in it and we get all the weight back on it. AKA primary, AKA transmission, AKA engine. All these other things. You would be surprised at how heavy some of the stuff is coming off this bike. But I think Donna has a dry weight of about 575 pounds to begin with. But we're going to stop the video right here, because I think we're probably going to call this the sidebar series. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with what we're doing, but we're still doing it, so we're going to call it a sidebar and then scoot it into the playlist. We're going to try to do some decoration on this bike while we're here. And one of the things that we're going to try to decorate is the front fender tip light and the wire that comes out of it that goes up to the main wiring harness. We're going to use some steel braid sleeve. Steel braid sleeve is the steel braid that you see on the outside of a steel braid hose. But in this case, we're not using a hose, we're using a wire, an 1/8 of an inch wire. So we've got some 1/8 of an inch steel sleeve that we're going to try to slide over that, and then into the fender, and then up to the main wiring harness between the tanks. And we're going to put some clear silicone over that. The reason that we're putting clear silicone over it is steel braid is abrasive. Anything that it rubs against, once it comes out of the fender, from the fender over to the fork that we're going to hold it to with a zip tie, up into between the tanks and maybe touching the assembly or the front neck or whatever as it passes through there, anything it rubs on or vibrates on, it's going to take the paint off of. So we're going to put a clear silicone on that to keep it from messing up the finish, either on the fenders, the forks, the frame, or the tank. It's going to be easier to do that without the wheel in here. So we're going to start that video here when we finish this one up. As always, please check out the Facebook page. There's some stuff there. We're getting some attention there. You know, like the channel, follow the channel so you can see the next video in this series. There should be somewhere up here a link popping up to the previous video and a link to the first video in the series so you can watch them all. Thanks for coming by the garage. We're going to button this thing up and move into the next one. Thanks for watching. Rate, comment, share, y'all.